At this point, fashion, which was a dream, has become a nightmare.
What do you think when you hear the term circular economy?
I don't see any real circularity in the apparel sector. I see permission to shop.
So we pushed ourselves through this take, make and waste system into a very, very risky situation where, to be honest, our continued survival, there's a question mark over it.
And in the modern system now, nature is seen there to exploit for profits, irrespective of the consequences.
Capitalism will totally fail if circularity doesn't really happen at some point.
What would you say to a fast fashion CEO?
So the one question that I would want to ask them is why they are comfortably killing the world.
Welcome everybody to the next panel discussion of Fashion Sustain. Today, part of the first Frankfurt Fashion Week. This panel today has been presented to you by Green Button, Grüner Knopf, and I'm very happy to introduce to you in a moment our great speakers. But for just a second, let me explain the little video that you saw up front. That was a contribution by Woolmark to our Fashion Sustain conference today. And they just wanted to also express how transparency is one of the most urgently needed aspects in global supply chains. And you already saw one of our panelists in the video. We will introduce Veronica in a moment. So today our panel is called Same Goals, Different Systems, How Transparency Triggers Responsibility. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the next more or less 40 minutes. So with no further ado, let me introduce my panel here today. First of all, I'm very happy to have Katharina Ladleif here, Head of Communications and Sustainability at Melawear, one of the really exciting brands that has been developing in Germany for the last couple of years, especially on the scene of sustainable fashion. Then we have Sebastian Herold, Senior Policy Officer of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ in Germany, who's also been heavily involved in the development of the Green Button, or in German it's called Grüner Knopf. And then last but definitely not least, Veronica Kassatly, who you already saw in this short intro by Woolmark, and who is an independent analyst and consultant, and who will definitely spice up our discussion here today a bit with her knowledge from the data side. So, first of all, this was a short introduction, but I would love everybody here in the panel to introduce yourself a little bit in terms of what also is your job and why does this topic of transparency play an important role for you. So maybe first, Katharina, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about like your connection or like the importance of transparency and due diligence in your daily work at Melawear?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Katharina Ladleif from Melawear. I work in the field of I hear me in a little bit in a double. Do you hear me as well in a double?
I hear you fine.
Okay.
So here it's just normal what you're saying.
Okay, so I will start again now. So as you just said, Melawear is a company that was founded from a sustainability aspect, or sustainability is in the core of our business, and from the beginning on we have been certified according to two different standards. On one hand, the GOTS standard for all the ecological aspects, and then all the fair trade cotton standard for the social aspects in our supply chain. And then we have also been very involved into the fair trade textile standard that is really about wages and living wages in our supply chain in India. And yeah, transparency is really important for us, as we even state our producers in India transparently, and talk about many different topics in our supply chain. And yeah, the process of due diligence has been really implemented at Melawear through the Green Button certification. And there it has been that we really got deeper into our risks that can also happen in our supply chain. And I would say that for us as a company, that was the first step in the process of due diligence.
Great. Thanks for this. I think our audience appreciates the little introduction. Then you already mentioned also you started using and getting certified for the Green Button. So maybe Sebastian, you can take over and explain your role at BMZ briefly. And I think, yeah, you also have a lot to do with transparency and due diligence there.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Nice being here. Also nice, Katharina, to see your face. I'm a follower of your podcast. I know your voice already. It's nice to get to know a face as well. I hope my connection is stable. I'm on holidays, as you can see from the picture in the background in Brittany in France. I hope it stays okay. I'm working within the BMZ, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, within a unit that actually kind of developed the Green Button 2 years ago. It was launched 2019. It's a governmental run textile label certification mark, which combines product criteria. We have a so-called meta label that builds on existing good labels or certification standards, like the mentioned GOTS already. And we have, as a, I'd say, unique selling point, maybe, the due diligence concept. We are proud that we actually have been the first, in our eyes, that actually kind of developed provable criteria from the United Nations guiding principles for business and human rights. So all the companies that actually want to have the Green Button certificate, they are first checked independently whether they fulfill the due diligence criteria, and then they can enable all products that actually have a certification mark that is proven by us already. So that's maybe in a nutshell what the Green Button is about. And I'm within the team, within the BMZ, responsible for the further development. We have actually on our webpage, grünerknopf.de, the consultation running, the second consultation about the revised Green Button criteria. So for all those who are interested in listening, please join and give us some feedback about our proposals for the next upcoming Green Button 2.0, that's the way. So maybe that's in a nutshell about my job there. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And that's also the perfect buzzwords that I can use to introduce or have Veronica introduce herself a bit more thoroughly, because I'm sure, Veronica, you would have some constructive criticism, obviously, for the Green Button, and you could probably give them a lot of advice on a few things from your analyst perspective. So yeah, please let us know a little bit about your experience and how you are dealing with transparency in your work.
Okay, well, I actually started life as an economist and a development economist and financial analyst. I used to work for the ODI and then for the World Bank. Fast forward many years, I started a tiny brand in Berlin. And I was looking at sustainability claims because we wanted to source conscientiously. And so I had concerns, if you will, which weren't being addressed. So I started writing, the writing got published. So that's how I kind of fell into this field, and that's why I'm here, because I can imagine a lot of people are going, well, where did she come from? What I'm concerned about with what I was listening to earlier and what people are saying here is we keep saying that we're measuring sustainability. We're not actually measuring sustainability. I have not found any indices anywhere that measure sustainability. They measure environmental impact, which is not one and the same thing. It's certainly extremely important, but there is a crucial metric in sustainability, which is the impact on the global poor. And this is particularly important, obviously, for farmed fibers, because farmed fibers are a vital source of income to some of the poorest people on the planet. It's their cash crop. We're talking about alpaca farmers in Peru. We're talking about cotton farmers in Benin. And so, I mean, I'm thrilled to see that Germany is putting its money where its mouth is. I think it's wonderful that they have the green button. I think this is a tremendous platform to build upon. And I think because comparative sustainability assertions are designed to cause economic harm, that is the point. You are trying to discourage consumers from buying fibers and fabrics that are unsustainable, and you're trying to move them towards those that are more sustainable. And so doing, by definition, the people who are producing the unsustainable fibers or the less sustainable fibers and fabrics will lose business. They will possibly, they will lose income, they will go out of business. So I feel that ethically, these kinds of decisions, these kinds of statements, they have to be made by a public body. They have to be open, transparent, peer review. So I think the fact that the German government is willing to start on this road and it's wonderful news. So yeah, I don't want to appear to be criticizing the green button in the sense that I know they're using existing indices, and it's not their fault if the existing indices are not measuring sustainability. But I think I'm going to have some data on alpaca if we have time to get around to that. But you know, it's very clear what was laid out in our common future back in 1987, that sustainability has to consider the impact. Indeed, it has to prioritize the impact on the global poor, whether we're meeting their needs, because we need to be concerned not just with equity between generations, i.e. our generation worrying about future generations, but we also have to be concerned about equity within our generation. So, yeah.
Thanks. That was, you kind of already went into my first question, but I think anyway, it would be, we can directly jump a bit deeper into the discussion. Katharina, I would wonder, like from the business perspective where you're sitting, since you're using certifications, like how do you think does the current certification systems already provide enough kind of information, especially in terms to the consumer, so that the consumer, based on certification, can actually take more conscious decisions?
I would say yes, but I think the problem is that most consumers don't really know the differences between the labels and the logos. I think there are a couple of standards and certificates that are known, but then there are others where consumers are not sure. And I think it's sometimes we hear that word, it's a label jungle. And that's definitely true. And I think we don't really need more and more standards, but we need holistic certificates such as the green button that also include all kind of different criteria, such as social standards, environmental standards, but also the company perspective. So what I think is a big added value from the green button, for example, is that this certificate includes also company aspects, and I think that's a good. It's a good initiative because it brings a lot of standards together. into one holistic standard.
Right. I think obviously that's something that is important for the consumer because, yeah, a jungle of certification is not going to help orientating oneself. And I mean, I thought interesting, like how you said, like also from the business perspective, that it's working. Do you think also, I mean, can do certifications? You have experience with 3 different types now. Do they also work a bit like a external consultancy to your business because they kind of provide guidelines, how to document, how to deal with your supply chain? Does it also help your business internally to work with certifications?
Yeah, I would definitely say yes, and it's true. They are a little bit like an external consultant, and they all have a little bit different focuses. And I think that helps us as a company. For example, the fair trade standard is really strong in marketing, and this also helps us as a company to get a bigger reach, and many consumers know them, and fair trade is really doing a lot to reach the end consumers, while the other 2 standards like GOTS and the Green Button have different focuses. And as I just said, the Green Button really helped us to analyze a little bit more the risks of our supply chain, and that was new for us, for example. And every standard we use has a different aspect and a different value for us, and yeah.
Right. Sebastian, how do you see that? I mean, I know this has been a very, very long process now for you, the teams around you that you're part of, to step by step develop the Green Button. I mean, 2 things I would find interesting. On the one hand, maybe you can give us a hint on the complexity behind, because obviously, as complex global supply chains are today, also kind of then bringing transparency into them is very complex. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the holisticness of the Green Button, or like the overall strategy of your ministry, because over the couple of last years, you have introduced a few different kind of formats that all were addressing sustainability in the one or the other way to the German textile and fashion market.
Yeah, thanks. I think the good message, just to continue with what Katharina has been said, is that kind of surveys show that the like people are more and more aware about the challenges and problems within the textile and apparel industry. There's just been a recent study by Otto, a German company, about ethical consumption, saying that 70% care about ethical criteria within their shopping considerations. I think that's good news. But then I think that's our starting point for the Green Button, as Katharina said, is that actually there's a jungle. We have more than 40 different certificates, and nobody besides experts really understands what's behind the different labels. And that has a lot of reasons. I think all of most of the standards we see, and we had a deeper look in, they have their specific reason for existence and their specific excellence area. I mean, that's what I found interesting about what Katharina just explained. But then we also found that we built in 2016, I think, a governmental comparable system. It's called Siegelklarheit. If you translate it literally, it means a label transparency or label clarity, just to give consumers something on hand to really compare the different standards. But the click rates are really low, and we found out that basically those who are interested already check the site, and you don't reach kind of new people, but the demand for getting to know what is sustainability. And I found your explanation, Veronica, very interesting about the kind of limitations within this sustainability discussion, that we need to focus more on the outcomes for the poor. But I just so I think what we tried with the Green Button is to make something that actually makes it clear for the end consumer this is sustainable in a more holistic approach. But I need to be clear. I mean, that's the biggest criticism towards the green button, and that's something that should be said as well, that we have limitations right now with the coverage of the supply chain. So we only cover the product area and the wet processing, and are trying to get deeper into the supply chain now with the new revised green button. So I think the approach of talking about holistic approaches, yes, I think that's the thing we are trying to have good product labels that check the supply chain, and then having due diligence concepts, so we know that the companies actually care for their supply chain, have a good risk analysis, and have a system in place to work if there are kind of things coming up in their supply chain. But also, I think there are limitations within this holistic approach. Like, for example, if you look at the auditors, certainly they ain't in a specific area, and you wouldn't find a good auditor with quality that actually covers social, environmental, and due diligence criteria. That's just too much. So basically, I think the idea of a holistic approach is very good, and that's where we're trying to head to. But I think it only will work out if we have more collaboration between the different standards in order to kind of use excellency that is there already. Maybe this as a short answer to a big question.
Thanks for keeping it short, since obviously in this context we have to shorten up things a little bit, which is anyway one of the big problems always. I mean, if we talk about holisticness, we can talk about the holisticness of the certification systems itself, which obviously then would be about economic aspects, ethical, social aspects, cultural aspects also, I believe, and environmental aspects, which are until now probably the best checked so far. But it's also about, like, we have a consumer side to things, we have a business side to things, and many other stakeholders actually. And consumers, they tend to prefer very simple kind of messages, so that they can take a decision based on that, while the truth is the complexity cannot be reduced. It can be simplified maybe in communication ways, but it's still going to be there. So Veronica, since I know you have like so much kind of diverse background knowledge about like how much data also we're missing along supply chains, and how complex this is, especially if we talk more about like smaller structures. I mean, the one thing is having certifications that work for corporates or like at least mid-sized companies, but the other side is also obviously like how does it work in smaller kind of supply chains, small farmers, etc. What do you think? How can we bridge this problem that on the one hand we have so many different aspects in the industry that I think consumers will never fully understand that, and that also can't be the goal, I believe. But at the same time, we do want to give consumers a fairly easy kind of way to orientate themselves. Like, do you think like with more data and more digital forms of certifications, maybe we can overcome these problems? Or how do you feel like where is our way into the future with not creating more and more certifications, but becoming clearer to the consumer side and still more diverse to the business side?
And can I add one question, because I'm really curious about this?
Please.
What would it mean for you, Veronica, to have more impact, like consideration within the whole field for this global poor? Like, how would the system look like for you if this would be considered more? Because as a ministry, certainly that's where we started. The global poor, that's our main task. So I'd be really interested also on this side.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer really quickly two things at once. First of all, you want to give consumer things as simple as possible. And one thing I would do if I was running Green Button, I would immediately try to I wouldn't just have one green button, because to suggest to consumers that all that matters is impact basically at the factory gate, which is what most of these things are measuring, is not right. And one way to already get the message across to them, I would have like, to me, it looks too like a green light. You can shop, you know? So I would have maybe like a little round circle that was white, which would be less than 10 wears or less than 30 wears, you know, like you have no sustainability at all. And then I would have it getting progressively darker so that you had like a pale one, I don't know, I mean, someone would have to decide on this, 30 to 100, and then a medium one, and then the really dark green one would be if you hit more than 300 wears. And then I think this immediately gives the message to the consumer that he or she has a responsibility in all of this. And how many times he or she wears that garment is really important. I mean, what matters about sustainability, or indeed cost to people, it's per wear. You know, it's not a Kleenex, it's not a sandwich. It's something that you're going to be using over time. And we really want consumers to think about this. And I think if consumers start thinking, oh, am I really going to wear this 100 times or 300 times or whatever number? Maybe they put it back on the shelf. So that would be my sort of consumer-facing suggestion. In terms of data, one of the things that I found very shocking when I first hit the sustainable apparel sector is how little data there really is when you're going down to the area which I'm looking at, which is really the sourcing of the fibers. There's very little data. We have things like the HIG MSI, which are built on random, well, they're not strictly random, they're cherry-picked LCAs, which are not using, they don't have the same boundaries, they don't have the same methodologies. We have manure coming in when we want to measure the upstream impacts of manure coming in when we want to consider silk. They're taken out when they want to consider organic cotton. They're using a study from 2006 for silk, to which they've added some 2014 data, but it's basically 2006 production. There's no solar power, there's no drip irrigation. Drip irrigation reduces the irrigation by roughly 60%, the water. And of course, they're looking at India when silk actually comes from China, and it's all rain-fed. So we really need data. And I personally feel this very strongly, that if we're going to have things like the EUPF, if we're going to have indices being used to advise consumers, and apparently even for tax purposes, we have things like Policy Hub advocating for tax concessions. You know, there was another report that just came out wanting to tax all virgin fibers. We really need to have identically crafted, if you will, LCAs, so that we can actually compare the environmental impact in a uniform and fair and just manner. Because I see this is really, really important. It doesn't just matter to consumers, it matters to the people who produce this. It is not fair to simply destroy their livelihoods based on some rather random out-of-date information. And I think it would just, I mean, this has to be the public sector. I think if Germany can take the lead on this and set about, you know, agreeing with people how these studies are going to be undertaken and the boundaries and because obviously there's ISO standards, but you have some flexibility in ISO standards. And they really need to bring in the global south. You know, this is where most of the stuff is, the fibers are produced, it's where most of the clothes are made, it's where a lot of the rubbish ends up, you know, the old clothes end up being dumped. But where are they? You go and look at half these sustainability initiatives and you will be hard put to find anybody. I mean, they have some reports come out, which are supposedly UN. But where is Burkina cotton in the, where is Benin cotton? Where is Peruvian alpaca? Argentine wool? They are not consulted, they are not asked. And you know, this is terribly wrong. So we have that would be your data for your environmental impact, but then somebody has to look at the socio-economic impact. And if you look at the ISO standards are quite firm that if you're going to make comparative assertions, you must also look at the socio-economic impact. But everyone seems to have thrown that one out, and nobody looks at the socio-economic impact at all. And this is absolutely crucial. If we have some time later, I can give you some data on what has happened to Peruvian alpaca farmers as a result of sustainability claims. So, but yeah, okay, I don't want to hog the floor.
Thanks for this little journey into the world of fibers and sourcing fibers. This is something I would love to dive further into, and I'm sure also Sebastian and Katharina would be interested, but maybe we have to postpone that after this public panel, since there's so much questions around that. I think Sebastian, sure, if you want to say something.
Just one short reaction, because I think it's it's nice to share within this like some of the complexity issues that we discussed in the background and that never show up in normal discussions. Certainly we had a lot of discussion about whether we should have not only one green button, but maybe different green buttons to foster development. But we found out that basically it's not so much convincing those who are convinced already, but it's trying to get those people on board that actually don't want to take the time to look so deep into it. And when you start with different label systems and different, I mean, that's out in the market anyway, like fair wear, for example, then it gets more complex, and then you might lose some of those who actually just need a clear sign by this because it's more sustainable than others. So just to say, it's interesting thoughts. We had it already, and that was to just share our thoughts or ideas on this one side. I think the second issue addressed is much more complicated, and it would be nice to continue this discussion, maybe bilateral later on. I'd be really interested in to get to know it a little deeper from your side. Thanks.
I'd love to stay in that discussion also, because I also find it very interesting. And I think it's very important. I mean, the question how to measure properly, especially the social impact side, I mean, we are just really doing baby steps there, I think, still for the last 20, 30 years, which obviously also has reasons within its complexity. But I would love to kind of, for the last few minutes that we have, look at the consumer perspective once again, because I mean, me also coming from a communication background more, I think it is quite complex to really bridge all these different kind of elements that are out there and that have a relevant influence on what a certification system or a labeling system, verification system should deliver. And so I would love to go back to Katharina and ask you, what is like your experiences in relationship with the retailers, with the consumers, because I think you work primarily a lot with retailers, so probably you also talk with them a lot about the communication with consumers, the feedback. What is your experience there? I mean, on the one hand, I know you're very open about your supply chain. You try to bring a lot of transparency there. You're also working in the global south. You're sourcing mostly from India, as far as I know. So you're like in the middle of this kind of global supply chains, but you're keeping them quite transparent. But like, yeah, what's your experience with the interest of the consumer? Do you get feedback on that? And is there consumers asking for more? Do they have more questions? For example, do you think would such a rating be interesting for your consumers to know how much wears are in one garment? Do you think this could be a trigger, or is that actually already adding more complexity than the standard consumer is kind of willing to take at the moment?
Yeah, it's hard to say, because on one hand, I would totally agree, and I also like these certification standards really that show, or also cradle to cradle shows the progress a brand is doing and on which sustainability path a product stands. But then on the other hand, I would also agree to Sebastian. Most of the consumers don't care that much often if the product is fulfilling maybe 60% or 100%. What they really care at the end is how it looks, if it's a good quality, and then if it's somehow ethically produced and also ecologically produced. But often what we have made we made the experience that even more information are often not really willed by most of the people. I mean, there are some people who really want to get deeper into the topic, and therefore we have, for example, our podcast, which Sebastian also already mentioned, where we really go deeper into topics. But this is also just a very small proportion of the customers, I would say.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it does make sense to what we have as experiences. Mostly, we also at the moment we would always recommend to our customers to shape things in like 2 or 3 communication layers, and the first one being super simple, and then you can go deeper with information because some people want to know, but at the beginning it's first of all catching the first attention is so difficult in this area where communication is such a 24/7 thing, like hitting us through so many media channels all the time. It's just really complicated also to bring your messages out there in the first place. So last round, and we have to keep it really short. So everybody has 1 minute now to formulate like your wish. Since we are in a massive transformation of the industry, there's nothing impossible, it seems. And parallel, we have digitalization really gaining traction worldwide. So what would be your wish for like next level certification system? I would love to start with Veronica.
Data. I mean, I've only got a minute. I would say data. Nobody has data. No data, no claim. And particularly if you're going to use generic data, and it seems that a lot of people are using generic data, then you really need to have robust generic data. And we don't have robust generic data. And so we're putting claims out there. We're saying this is more sustainable, that is more sustainable, and we actually don't know. So yeah, my wish is that the German government is going to go ahead and start initiating the creation of a suite of standardized LCAs for all fibers.
And you kept it very short. Thanks for that. And yeah, I wonder, like, how can it be that there's not enough data? Are they not really collecting it, or is there not just not enough sharing of data? Sebastian, what would be your wish? I mean, I know that's very complicated in your position to say that, but maybe you find a way around.
No. I think there's nothing to hide right now. I think I said it before. I think collaboration for me is key, and collaborations also means sharing of data. And I think having on the one side the view on how to convince more people to be responsible, how to convince more like consumers, but also companies. But on the other hand, and I think that's where state should come in, and I totally support what Veronica says. We as a state, we have a specific task in trying to look at the whole system and trying to make it better on the long term in order to set standards. And I'm happy to continue this conversation later on to better understand the points that Veronica made. So this is maybe in a nutshell. Thanks a lot to all.
Great. Well, and then Katharina, what would be your wish? Last minute for you.
Yeah, first wish maybe that people and customers understand and recognize standards and certifications more and make their purchase decisions accordingly. And a second wish is also that the standards also really look on the needs and demands of the producers in the global south, and try not to always look if they are doing things correct or wrong, but go more into a discussion with them and make really a clear picture of the situation there and how then we can transform supply chains in a better way. I think that is definitely needed, and for example, the new fair trade textile standard is making a really important point in that area, and we have got a lot of good feedback from our producers in that area, that they feel more understood by an auditing situation, when the auditor is not so much just making notes if something is right or wrong, but rather really looks how it works and how we can then make things better for the management, but also for the workers. And I think that is an important point as well.
Great, thanks. I think that also sounds like a possible solution to create more and relevant data, to also look at positive things, to create a more holistic picture of the situation locally. We have run out of time. It was lovely having you. I really want to thank each one of you, and also a brief thanks again to Woolmark recommending Veronica to us here. That was a pleasure having you. And obviously thanks also to Green Button making this whole panel possible at Fashion Sustain. And thanks again also to Kata and Melawear. Lovely to see you striving. And that's it. We are out. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.